Hello, and welcome to our podcast, episode number 78. A lethal hitman and his young protege unleash mayhem on the Mafia. I'm Timothy, and I am here with my dear friend Thomas. Tonight, we are going to discuss a film called Léon the Professional. As always, spoilers ahead. Léon the Professional is a 1994 film about an Italian-American hitman named Léon who meets Mathilda, a 12-year-old girl living in the same building. When Mathilda's family becomes entangled with corrupt DEA agents, she turns to Léon for protection and training. Well, Thomas, so did you enjoy Léon the Professional?
I found it to be a rather passable film, Timothy. It had its moments of tension and intrigue, but overall felt somewhat underwhelming. The relationship between Léon and Mathilda was quite interesting. However, their dynamic changed too abruptly at times, which took away from the realism, in my opinion.
I couldn't disagree more, Tom.
This film was a complete waste of time, if you ask me.
There were several plot holes that left me scratching my head throughout the entire thing. And as for their relationship, it seemed utterly implausible that someone like Léon would take on an apprentice, especially one who was barely even a teenager.
Well, now, Timothy, you have to remember that this is just a work of fiction. It's not meant to be taken too seriously all the time. Besides, Léon is portrayed as someone with very few ties to society anyway. He doesn't really seem like the type who would adhere strictly to social norms.
I see your point there, Tom, but still.
It just didn't sit well with me, you know.
And let's not forget about that ending. Talk about rushed and unsatisfying. What did you think of Natalie Portman's performance, by the way?
I thought she did quite well given her age at the time. She managed to convey a lot of emotional depth in her character, which was quite impressive, especially considering this was one of her earlier roles. As for the ending, while it may have been abrupt, I felt like it fit with the overall tone and style of the film.
Well, Thomas, I must say you seem to be quite fond of this film despite its flaws. But let me ask you this. What did you think about the portrayal of violence in Léon the Professional?
I thought it was quite realistic, actually. It didn't shy away from showing the gruesome and messy nature of violence, which is something I appreciate in a film like this one. Of course, not everyone might find that appealing, but for me, it added to the overall authenticity of the story.
I can understand where you're coming from, Tom. However, I found the amount of violence to be excessive and gratuitous at times. It didn't serve much purpose other than shock value, in my opinion. But let's move on to another aspect of this film, the score. How did you feel about it?
The music was one of my favorite parts about Léon the Professional. It complemented the action scenes perfectly and added an air of mystery and suspense during the more tense moments. I thought it was very well done overall.
That is true, Thomas. The music did enhance the viewing experience for sure. But now let me ask you a question that has been bugging me since we started discussing this film. Why did Mathilda's father steal from the DEA in the first place? It didn't make much sense to me and seemed like an unnecessary plot point.
I think the director wanted to show how desperate he was for money due to his addiction issues. It added another layer of conflict within the story and helped us understand why Mathilda sought help from Léon in the first place.
I guess that makes sense on paper, but it just didn't translate well on screen for me. Anyway, let's move on to our last topic. Do you have any interesting trivia about Léon the Professional that might surprise our listeners?
Well, Timothy, did you know that the role of Mathilda was initially offered to a much older actress named Winona Ryder before Natalie Portman got cast in it? Also, Jean Reno, who played Léon, had never fired a gun before this film and had to undergo extensive training just for the role.
I find that quite fascinating, Tom. Thank you for sharing those tidbits with us. And now, as always, let's give our final verdict on Léon the Professional. On a scale of 1 to 10 stars, how would you rate this film?
Considering its flaws and strengths, I would say it deserves about a 6 out of 10 stars. It wasn't perfect, but had some redeeming qualities that made it worth watching, in my opinion.
All right then, Tom. Looks like we have another disagreement here. I gave this film a 1 out of 10 stars rating earlier. But I must say, your trivia about the casting and Jean Reno's training was very interesting to learn. Thank you for sharing that with us listeners.
Well, Timothy, I can certainly see why we have such different opinions on this film. But speaking of trivia, did you know that there was actually a real-life hitman named Léon who served as inspiration for the character in the movie? He was a notorious assassin known as the Professional back in the 1920s and 30s due to his cold-blooded efficiency. In fact, some of Léon's mannerisms and traits are based on this real-life figure.
That is quite fascinating, Tom. I didn't know about that connection between the film and its supposed inspiration. But it does make sense, given how meticulous Léon is shown to be throughout the movie. And speaking of which, I found it interesting how director Luc Besson chose to cast Jean Reno in the role, despite him being French and not Italian-American like his character. It just goes to show that talent knows no boundaries when it comes to acting.
Unquestionably, Tim. Besson actually wanted someone who could bring an air of mystery and detachment to the role, which he felt Reno perfectly embodied. As for the language barrier, they chose to have Léon speak mostly in English with a French accent so that it wouldn't be too jarring for the audience. It was definitely a bold choice, but one that paid off well given how iconic Jean Reno's portrayal of Léon has become over the years.
I must say I agree with you there, Tom.
Reno did an exceptional job in bringing this complex character to
life despite the language barrier and cultural differences. And now that we've discussed some interesting trivia about Léon the Professional, let me ask you a question related to its soundtrack. What do you think about the song Little Wing by American rock band Nirvana, which is prominently featured in one of the movie's most memorable scenes?
I must say that I wasn't much of a fan of grunge music back then, but even I can appreciate how well Little Wing fits into that particular scene. It adds an eerie atmosphere to what was already a tense and emotional moment between Léon and Mathilda. The song choice really amplifies the intensity of their connection at that point in the story, which is quite remarkable considering it's such a contrast from the rest of the movie's score.
That is true, Tom. The juxtaposition between the heavy metal and rock songs used throughout most of the film, and then suddenly having this mellow, melancholic song like Little Wing play during that pivotal scene really does add another layer of depth to both the story and its characters. It's just one example of how well Besson utilized music in Léon the Professional.
Absolutely, Timothy. The use of music in Léon the Professional was quite ingenious, if you ask me. It really helps set the tone for each scene and adds an extra layer of emotion that would otherwise be missing. In fact, one could argue that the soundtrack is almost as important to the film's success as its story or performances.
I couldn't agree more, Tom. The soundtrack does play a huge role in enhancing our viewing experience and immerses us even deeper into the world of Léon the Professional. And speaking of the soundtrack, I found it quite interesting how director Luc Besson chose to feature a mix of genres throughout the film. There's the aforementioned heavy metal and rock songs, but also some classical music, pieces that add an element of elegance and sophistication to certain scenes. What are your thoughts on this eclectic mix?
Well, Timothy, I believe it was Besson's intention to create a unique blend of sounds that would reflect Léon's complex personality and the diverse nature of his life experiences. By incorporating genres like classical music and jazz into the film, he hoped to convey a sense of refinement and elegance which contrasts sharply with the grittiness and violence depicted on screen. In this regard, I think Besson succeeded admirably, as it adds depth to Léon's character and makes him more relatable despite his dark profession.
That is an excellent point, Tom. It really does showcase Léon's multifaceted personality and highlights the contrast between his public and private lives. And speaking of Besson's choices, do you have any favorite songs from the Léon the Professional soundtrack? One that particularly stands out to me is Shibby Nat by Eric Serra, which plays during the scene where Mathilda is training with Léon at his apartment. I find it quite haunting and beautiful all at once.
Yes, indeed, Timothy. Shibby Nat is definitely one of my favorites from the soundtrack as well. The melody perfectly captures that eerie atmosphere during their training sessions and adds an air of mystery to their burgeoning relationship. Another standout track for me would have to be Little Wing by Nirvana, which we've already discussed earlier. It just fits so well into the scene where Léon visits Mathilda in her room after killing her family, that it almost feels like an integral part of their story rather than just background music.
I completely agree with you there, Tom. Little Wing and Shibby Nat are both exceptional songs that really elevate those specific scenes to another level. And speaking of scenes, one of my favorite moments in Léon the Professional is when Léon goes to the opera house to find Mathilda after she gets into trouble with the deer. The use of classical music during this scene not only adds an element of grandeur, but also highlights their growing connection even further, despite their vastly different backgrounds and lifestyles. What are your thoughts on that particular sequence?
Well, Timothy, I must say that scene is indeed quite memorable and showcases the film's use of classical music quite effectively. It serves as a turning point in their relationship, where Léon realizes that he has feelings for Mathilda beyond just her being his ward or protege. This realization forces him to question his solitary existence and consider opening himself up to forming deeper connections with others, even if it means putting himself at risk. As for the performances of Jean Reno and Natalie Portman in this film, I think they both did an exceptional job bringing their characters to life. Reno managed to capture Léon's cold detachment while also showing glimpses of vulnerability throughout the story, which added depth to his character. On the other hand, Natalie Portman was able to convey Mathilda's innocence and naivety at the beginning of the film, while gradually transforming into a more mature and resilient individual by its end. Their on-screen chemistry is also quite palpable, which helps elevate their characters' relationship from being merely a mentor-student dynamic to something much more complex and nuanced. The way they interact with each other throughout the film, especially during those quiet moments of introspection or camaraderie, really highlights the emotional weight their story carries. In conclusion, I believe Léon the Professional is an outstanding example of how actors can bring a director's vision to life through their performances. Both Jean Reno and Natalie Portman delivered stellar performances that not only elevated their characters, but also added layers of complexity to the film's narrative. So, Timothy, do you have any other thoughts or insights about Léon the Professional that you would like to share with our listeners? Perhaps some other aspects of the film that stood out for you or that you found particularly interesting?
Well, Thomas, I must say that you've made some excellent points about the performances and themes present in Léon the Professional. It truly is a remarkable film that has left an indelible mark on cinema history. Speaking of which, I believe it's safe to say that this movie has had quite an influence on various other films and TV series over the years. One such example is the hit action comedy franchise Kill Bill, directed by Quentin Tarantino. The film contains several nods and references to Léon the Professional, including similar themes of revenge and mentorship, as well as stylistic choices like the use of anamorphic widescreen cinematography and a synth-heavy soundtrack. Additionally, Tarantino himself has cited Léon as one of his biggest influences when it comes to creating memorable characters like Beatrix Kiddo from Kill Bill. Another notable influence can be seen in the TV series La Femme Nikita, which aired in the late 90s. The show features a similar plotline where a female assassin is saved from death row and trained to become a top-tier operative for a secret government organization. The character of Nikita even shares some similarities with Mathilda, including her initial naivety and determination to exact revenge on those who wronged her. Furthermore, the show's blend of high-octane action sequences and emotional depth can be traced back to Léon, the Professional's own unique blend of genres.
That's an interesting point you bring up, Tim. It's clear that Léon the Professional has had a lasting impact on the film industry and popular culture as a whole. Speaking of which, I was recently re-watching the movie John Wick starring Keanu Reeves, and I couldn't help but notice some parallels with Léon and Mathilda's story. Like Léon, John Wick is a retired assassin who gets pulled back into the world of violence after his wife passes away. The character of Michaela also shares similarities with Mathilda in terms of their relationship with the protagonist. Both are initially reluctant, but eventually form a bond with them as they navigate through this dangerous underworld. Furthermore, the use of animals as symbols or motifs can be seen in both films as well. Léon's pet goldfish is a constant presence throughout the movie, symbolizing his solitude and detachment from society, while John Wick's beloved dog serves as a reminder of his humanity and connection to others. The death of these animals triggers a chain reaction that sets the protagonists on their respective paths towards revenge. In conclusion, Timothy, I believe that Léon the Professional has had a profound influence on various aspects of cinema and pop culture over the years. Its themes of mentorship, revenge, and personal growth continue to resonate with audiences today, while its unique blend of genres and stylistic choices have inspired countless filmmakers and storytellers alike. So what do you think our listeners should take away from this discussion about Léon the Professional's legacy?
I completely agree with you there, Tom. It's quite fascinating how this movie has had such a lasting impact on modern cinema and popular culture as a whole. We can see its influence in everything from action thrillers like John Wick to TV shows like La Femme Nikita. But more importantly, I think Léon the Professional stands on its own merits as an exceptional piece of filmmaking. The performances by Jean Reno and Natalie Portman are nothing short of brilliant, and the soundtrack adds another layer of depth to the story.
Yes, indeed, Timothy. It's clear that Léon the Professional is a masterpiece in its own right and one that will continue to inspire future generations of filmmakers for years to come. I must say that I'm glad we had this opportunity to discuss our thoughts on the movie and its impact on popular culture. I hope our listeners have enjoyed listening to us debate about one of their favorite films.
Well, thank you, Tom. We're always happy to share our thoughts with our audience and engage in meaningful discussions about cinema. So, what do you think our viewers should take away from this episode?
I believe they should appreciate the artistry and craftsmanship that goes into making a great film like Léon the Professional. It's not just about action sequences or special effects. It's about the story, the characters, and the performances that bring them to life. And most importantly, They should remember that every film has something unique to offer and deserves our attention and respect.
Absolutely.
So with that said, let's wrap up this episode of Tim.
We hope you enjoyed listening to us discuss Léon the Professional. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment on the video if you have any thoughts or opinions about our discussion. Until next time, keep watching movies and keep enjoying the show